Good evening. Welcome to the Pearl Report. I'm Diana Lin. In Hong Kong, over 70% of graded historic buildings are privately owned, and they are increasingly being turned into commercial premises. The government has no power to stop owners unless a building is declared a monument. Producer Billy Wong looks at what can be done to incentivize owners to sacrifice commercial gains for collective memories. Or should we infringe upon private property rights?
An 80-year-old pawn shop on the verge of demolition. How far can the Antiquities Advisory Board protect our heritage?
It's a pity the AAB failed to protect the history of Hong Kong.
When we promote the heritage conservation, should we at the same time respect private property rights?
He always put the works protect private property rather than peace preservation. I'm so disappointed.
We do whatever is in the best interest of our commercial concern.
People will want to go to Kingley, not necessarily just as a consumer, but to experience the place.
We have to accept that gentrification of any old area.
At the moment, I don't really see a champion of heritage preservation.
There's only so much that the government could do.
In 1 month, heritage activist Victor Yun gathered over 2,000 signatures in an online petition for members of the Antiquities Advisory Board. It's to stop the private owners from demolishing Tong Tat Pawn Shop for a 23-floor commercial complex. It's a Grade 3 historic building. Hong Kong has categorized 108 built heritage as monuments, protected by law from unauthorized alteration, and around 1,000 lesser valued historic buildings, graded 1, 2, or 3, that are not legally protected from redevelopment.
I'm very disappointed. Non-sanitary power grading system. This is meaningless to preservation.
The grading is done by the Antiquities Advisory Board with 23 professionals, mainly from the architectural field. It also advises government on heritage preservation.
We ask for the government to list at Tong Tat Pawn to propose a monument because this is the only way to preserve the Tong Tat Pawn.
The shop was built in the late 1930s by a pawnbroker family from Macau. The building is noted for its veranda and curved corner. The AAB decided Tong Tat should remain Grade 3.
That kind of shop house design with veranda actually very typical. There are still a dozen of similar buildings around Hong Kong. So it doesn't really give us any good enough justification to lift the grading of the building.
We should preserve as many as we can. Now they're saying having fewer of them is no big deal.
Architect Chong Li Lam was among 3 out of the 14 members who voted to lift Tong Tat's grading.
I voted for Grade 2 because I think Grade 3 is a bit low. Even if everyone agreed, we couldn't have preserved it.
The grading system, at most, a general guidance for the general public on the value of those heritage buildings.
The grading system can't protect historic buildings. There are flaws.
Like Tong Tat, over 700 graded historic buildings in Hong Kong are privately owned. Owners are free to alter or redevelop their properties as they see fit.
When we promote the heritage conservation, should we at the same time respect private property rights? When we say respect, that means that when there is any measurable impact, that we will have to provide compensation.
Compensation includes purchase of heritage buildings.
Use public money to buy a historical building, it's very controversial. We hope that the government would at least think about inserting a consultation to allow the public to discuss, should we protect or should we preserve this very important piece of history of Hong Kong, and how much should we pay for that?
Let's look at Ho Tong Garden. The government actually have very tough negotiation with the owner.
In 2010, the owners of Ho Tong Garden applied to redevelop the Grade 1 historic building, and the government considered buying it for preservation.
We're talking about whether the society as a whole believe that the government should spend, billions of public money on conserving a building.
I met the secretary many times, couldn't agree on the money.
In 2013, she demolished Ho Tong Garden and sold the land at a record $5.1 billion to a mainland tycoon. The government has negotiated with the owners of Tung Tak Pon since 2009.
Unfortunately, the owner is fairly certain that they think that the demolition of building is the best way.
Conservation expert Ada Wong suggests the government combine the Antiquities and Monuments Office under the Home Affairs Bureau with the Commissioner for Heritage's office at the Development Bureau.
Things are segregated in different departments. It means nobody's taking the lead. If it is combined, it becomes a bigger unit and becomes more important. And hopefully it can propose law reforms, new regulations for the preservation of heritage building, propose and negotiate with private owners in a more proactive way.
The current setup has been doing a good job. Government structure aside, the conservation of built heritage also hinges on the support of the community, as well as the private owners of historic buildings.
Even though Tung Tak Pawn Shop might not be preserved, I think these actions would push the government to rethink heritage policy, and hopefully we can have better laws for the future.
Within walking distance from Tung Tak Pon is a similar building that you can see behind me, the Wu Cheung Pawn Shop. This Grade 2 historic building has been preserved and now houses a restaurant and a retail shop. The owners have retained these old signs on the side of the building, a traditional pawn shop symbol of a bat holding a coin. The bat symbolizes fortune and the coin is wealth. This pawn shop dates back to the early 1900s. Alan Lowe has been renting it from the Urban Renewal Authority since 2008 to run a two-story high-end restaurant. He thinks commercialization is a good mode of preservation.
We're a full-service restaurant open to the public, so a lot of people in the Hong Kong as well as the international community come inside and see this amazing heritage building, and to look out to this beautiful authentic Wan Chai scape with the trams running up and down the street.
It's not low-price consumption. Although it sometimes provides free services to guided tours. For example, some meaningful cultural activities I've held. It's, after all, not an open space that anyone can get in without spending.
A 3-course set lunch costs $200.
As a commercial tenant, we feel that we have created something that is both approachable to the Wan Chai neighborhood as well as the general public in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong restaurant environment is very cutthroat. If you're too expensive, you won't make it. If you're too cheap, then obviously you don't make enough to sustain.
The roof of the restaurant is controversial.
The roof itself is a public space. But when the operator helping to manage it doesn't know how to manage a public space, the public cannot enjoy the space.
The roof is open to the public only from 11 a.m. to 8 p.m.
We do whatever is in the best interest of our commercial concern. Unless our landlord or the government is ready to come in with some form of subsidy for us to promote heritage or create education programs, I suppose that will have to be a separate conversation.
Coming up after the break.
If Gingyinglei had been turned into a commercial space, a lot of the cultural value would have been diluted inevitably.
Life was tough in the Blue House back then.
The size of the building doesn't allow for a proper big hotel.
From the mid-levels to Wan Chai to an outlying island, we see how heritage buildings are revitalized. Is there a best approach to preservation? Stay with us.
Welcome back to the Pearl Report. In Hong Kong, historic buildings are scattered around the territory instead of clustered in certain areas. Yet conservation groups still want these singular freestanding buildings preserved. Producer Billy Wong asks, what is the value in that for our communities and for Hong Kong's heritage?
Gingyinglei is a monument to Hong Kong's heritage. This open day drew hundreds of visitors. Gingyinglei is a three-story mansion in Stubbs Road, built by a Chinese merchant's family in the late 1930s. That was when the Chinese were still persona non grata on the peak, and the building of Gingyinglei symbolized the rise of the local mercantile class and the emergence of the mid-levels as an upper-class neighborhood. In 2008, the government declared it a monument for preservation after giving the owner an adjacent plot of land in return.
We have many interesting thoughts, such as it would make a good archive for old movies from the era of yesterday's glitters.
For usage, I don't want Hong Kongers to come, spend money and then go. I wish to see some historical and cultural inheritance, like children and citizens guiding tours.
Since 2011, the government has been calling for bids on revitalizing Gingyinglei and rejecting them as unsustainable or impractical.
And so we are taking a look at the case again and see how Gingyinglei could be revitalized or better used under government's watch.
I mean, what time's revenge?
Martial arts enthusiast Hing Chow and architect Dylan Bryce Baker bid for a martial arts institute.
Gingyinglei actually has a sort of history of martial arts through film, so through cinema. It's really famous, or most famous, through Enter the Dragon. So Bruce Lee's kind of iconic film, that was the bad house, the head bad guy. So there's some of the most famous fight scenes with Bruce Lee.
Gingyinglei has played this complex, symbolic and cultural role, not only in terms of the development of Hong Kong, but also in terms of the global perception of Chinese culture and Kung Fu in particular.
Their bid narrowly missed selection due to
financial sustainability. We realized from the beginning that to make Gingyinglei financially self-sustainable would be a big challenge. We are very glad that the government, in not awarding the site to us, also decided not to award it to more other, perhaps more commercially driven tenders, which will be a disappointment to the Hong Kong public. A lot of the cultural value, the legacy of Gingyinglei would have been diluted inevitably.
George Wong suggests turning Gingyinglei into a wedding venue. His company was also a bidding finalist.
Everybody looking for unique places in Hong Kong to have a good wedding ceremonies. And there are very few. I know it's going to be a big hit for the people who want to get married, who want to have a beautified or unique site.
He planned to build a tent on a slope around the building, but
The government already identified most of these roofs have problems. I believe it's because of this technicality that the government do not feel safe enough to grant us this project. Of course, we are disappointed. The government must fix the slopes first.
Built in the late 1920s, the Blue House in Wan Chai is a Grade 1 historic building.
It is a Tonglao and it is a pre-war. We don't really have that many pre-war buildings in Hong Kong now because they have all been demolished. Aesthetics is not the most important.
Why is the Blue House painted blue? By all accounts, it's not a deliberate aesthetic decision, but the decorators back then only had blue paint, so a blue house it became. As conspicuous as the bright color are these signs and billboards. They're the legacy of the martial arts school and the osteopathy clinic that have operated here for decades. 75-year-old Kung Fu master Lam Chun-fai grew up in the Blue House with his parents and 5 siblings. His father, Lam Chou, moved here in the late 1930s and coached Hong Kun, a southern Chinese Kung Fu style in a school-cum-clinic.
My dad left his doors open when he was coaching. We're inside the school and people gathered around to watch. Some didn't join a class after watching for 2 months. Others were interested and came in to enroll.
Nowadays, Lam Chun-fai and his son Oscar teach Hong Kun from their flat in North Point. Life is more comfortable here.
Life was quite tough in the Blue House. We had no gas heater or anything. Patting our chests, we poured water as cold as 8 to 10 degrees to wash ourselves.
Now there's a water heating system for the 10 households still residing in the 3 tenements forming the Blue House. But life remains grim.
They all need upgraded kitchens, upgraded bathrooms, proper drainage, a lot of technical work to bring them up to date.
Margaret Broke is working with St. James Settlement charity to gradually renovate the Blue House so the 10 households can continue living there.
We also wanted to create a community where people will continue to know each other well, have some common areas within the buildings so people can congregate. And there'll be a lot of interactive community access, as well as the social enterprise restaurants on the ground floor.
In our design, we have preserved 2 show flats allowed for public visit by guided tour.
Eric Lee is the architect heading the revitalization project.
The old flats are the original timber partitions, timber bunk beds, and the tight living space, tiles with unique flowering patterns. And all the original settings and material and fabric can be touched, can be seen by the public. There will be a vibrant neighborhood lifestyle restored back to the Blue House clusters.
In stark contrast, upscale bars and new luxury flats have mushroomed in the vicinity. Across the street from a Blue House, a residential flat can sell for $20,000 per square foot.
Gentrification tends to come wherever you have upgrades and improvements of any old area, but it needs to be slow and it needs to be inclusive of the people who are there and to be consulted.
If we want a district to be brand new, it doesn't have character. With a preserved historic building, usually people are attracted to live in that neighborhood. They love that neighborhood, they identify with that neighborhood. Sometimes, like in a painting, something could be left blank, to have lighter colors. Then everything should be heavily occupied.
Northwestern Lantau Island. The Tai O Heritage Hotel is a government-owned Grade 2 historic edifice. The Development Bureau cooperates with a property developer-funded social enterprise to run it. It was converted from a police station built in 1902 to secure Hong Kong's western border with China. Philip Liao is the architect.
The size of the building doesn't allow for a proper big hotel. A lot of them are done in historical cellular spaces. And there's not one big space. You might at least a place for breakfast. It would be very difficult and it would be damaging to try to knock down some walls to create a large space.
So he used space on roof to create a dining room and installed a reversible glass marquee on top to avoid damaging the original structure. Accessibility was another challenge.
So we've done a slanting lift, so it has tracks, a bit like the tram. The wheelchair can sit in there and it can move up to here, and then they can access this thing without barriers.
Frankie Lui manages the hotel.
Tai O Hertz Hotel is not only engaged the Hong Kong community and the overseas travelers, but we also work with people in Tai O community in preserving the Tai O unique cultural traditions. On our menu, we serve tasty dishes. It made with the Tai O's very own ingredients, such as shrimp paste, shredded egg yolk, and silver shrimp XO sauce. 哇嚇！喂，聽日又要你同我攞2桶蝦醬攞去酒店咯。We provide long-term employment and training opportunities to the Tai O residents. I think we have the close connection between the hotel and the community and the people in Tai O.
Well, thank you for watching our show. It will be re-aired on Monday and Saturday, as well as on tvb.com. Until next time, from the Pearl Report team, good night, good luck, and good health.